Great. This week we're talking about biodiversity, and bio is living stuff, bio is life, and diversity is variety. So this is a variety of life, and these notes can be kind of a bummer because it talks about all the ways that we as humans are, messing up the planet, messing up biodiversity, kind of ruining it for future generations and the number of species that are going extinct. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't learn about it. Just because it is a little bit depressing, um, doesn't mean that we should avoid it. It is very important. So, what is biodiversity? So, in short, it is biological diversity, and the biological is living organisms, diversity is variety. It's just having a huge variety of life on Earth. And biodiversity is the variability or differences among living organisms from all sources. This includes diversity within species, between species, and diversity in the ecosystems. So, why study biodiversity? Like, why does this matter to us? We need to study it when we make decisions about resources. So humans need stuff too, and that's okay. We need stuff, but sometimes there's better places to put stuff. So if there's a habitat that has, 10 endangered species living in it, it would be a bad idea to build an apartment complex right on top of that land. But if there's another piece of land that has, only two endangered species living on it, then maybe that's a better choice. So we can make better decisions about where to leave habitats alone and where it's okay for humans to take resources from. Each species is interconnected. We know that. We know that because of food webs, and ecological health has to do with all these interconnected relationships. So the more species go extinct, the more it's going to threaten all life. So even stuff you don't like mosquitoes or flies, eventually it's going to kind of trickle up to affect the species you do like, okay? Like turtles or frogs or those things that we think are kind of cute. The smaller, uglier bugs support those organisms as well. And then nature provides us with food, building materials, clean water. All of those things come out of nature, so that's kind of important. And healthy ecosystems are better able to survive change. So if we protect biodiversity and we're in this huge period of climate change, then on the other side of that, more organisms will make it through this period of change. So another reason that we study biodiversity is because scientists, a lot of scientists, I'm not going to say all of them, a lot of scientists think we're currently in an extinction event, and they call that the sixth mass extinction or Holocene extinction. And the difference between this one and the other previous five is that this one we are attributing totally to humans. Lots of scientists don't agree with this. They don't think we're currently in a mass extinction event, but the hard thing about an extinction event, previous five at least, is we can only identify them thousands of years later after they've already happened, and we see their effects in the fossil record. So if you're, in the beginning of one, how would you know it's going to happen until it's kind of too late and it's already happened? So previous extinction events, though, the previous five, not this one, they have taken out 70 to 90% of life on Earth. A famous one that you probably know about is the dinosaurs. So the extinction of the dinosaurs, and they were taken out by a giant comet crashing into Earth and blocking out the sun, making it cold. And dinosaurs already being cold-blooded, not being able to get access to the sun, they would pretty much freeze to death and die. But during this time period, there were your ancestors were hanging out there. They were little tiny rat-like things, and they were the first mammals, and they were there during the extinction of the dinosaurs. And by taking out the dinosaurs, it kind of allowed mammals to rise up in that. Like, we wouldn't be here without that dinosaur extinction event. It kind of cleared the land, and mammals who had fur, it didn't bother them that there was no sunlight and that it was cold. They were prepared for that. So diversity helps survive change as well. If those mammals weren't there, it's possible that maybe there would be no life on Earth. But the fact that the mammals were there, they were then able to take over from the dinosaurs. So we know that animals are interconnected in food webs. So as one organism goes extinct, so do the others that are connected to them. And you think about that like you set up dominoes and you knock them over and they all fall down. And habitats are a lot like that. So taking out one organism can take out many. And why study it? Because we might be able to do something about it. We're not helpless. We make decisions and we can make rules and regulations to protect organisms. We do nowadays. We have Endangered Species Acts, and the United States enforces them um, aggressively. There was a teacher I worked with a couple of years ago, and he had to go to federal prison because he shot a protected bird on federal land, and was arrested for that. So we're pretty aggressive at protecting animals that are particularly very endangered animals, and there's huge fines and jail time for that. And so we do things to protect biodiversity, and that has helped bring a lot of organisms back from extinction. So we're not helpless. We can do something about this. But the way we do things about it is we need to be educated about the problem first. All right, here is a graph, kind of a little bit depressing. So back in the 15 or 1600s, if you look at um, this orange line here, which is other vertebrates, so low levels of extinction, and then you get to the 1900s and 2000s, and you can see that it really increases from there. This is extinction, so extinction is going up. Same thing with other vertebrates, same thing, with birds here. Birds has a pretty steep line. Mammals has a very steep line. So since the 1900s, since the Industrial Revolution, since the practice of agriculture, for a huge part of our issue with declining biodiversity has to do with our agricultural practices and the fact that we clear cut large amounts of land and then we plant a single monoculture crop on it. So if you look out in the fields that we have around here, they're not showing biodiversity. It's usually a single species that's kind of taking up the whole entire space, and that doesn't lead to a whole lot of diversity in the birds that show up and the insects that show up and even the soil diversity. So planting a single kind of crop is not a great idea, and you can see that. So once we started doing that, extinction has increased. There are three ways that we can describe biodiversity. So we can talk about the species diversity, the genetic diversity, and the ecosystem diversity. So species diversity is just number of species in a given area. So there's an island with 2 bird species and a lizard. That's going to be more diverse than an island that has 3 birds. So bird and lizard are very different from each other, whereas 3 birds are more similar. So the more differences you get, the better. And that's species diversity. And so you can see these trees, they're all the same tree. That's pretty low species diversity. Whereas over here, I see, 5 or 6 different kinds of plants in this picture. So this is a much higher species diversity. So when we're making decisions about conservation, we want to try and go with the ones with higher species diversity because we kind of get more bang for our buck. We're saving more stuff in the same amount of area. And so it's the number of species as well as the categories of organisms. Then there's genetic diversity. So this is variations of genes within a species. Lots of distinct populations within a species, lots of varieties of rice in India, all from the same species. So here you look at this picture, these are all kinds of rice. And you can see they all look very, very different from each other. And so that's species diversity. They're all rice, they're all the same species, but there are lots of variety. And here in these potatoes, they're all potatoes, but you can see there's lots of different versions of the potato. And there's lots of genetic diversity there in potatoes. So the more genetic diversity, the more you have a chance to survive change, which is what we want. So genetic variation within a population as a whole is genetic diversity. And then ecosystem diversity. So there's a variety of ecosystems within an area. You live in California, and California is unique in its amazing ecosystem diversity. If you're a Californian and you want to go hang out in the desert, you've got one nearby. If you want to go to the ocean, you've got one nearby. If you want to go to the mountains, you've got those nearby. It doesn't matter where you are in California. There's a huge amount of ecosystem diversity. And so you live down here in the Colorado desert, but we're not all that far from mountains here, an ocean over here, and you've got valleys over here. And so there's lots of ecosystem diversity, lots of bioregions in California. Ecosystem diversity is very hard to measure, and that's due to boundaries kind of overlap. So if you're standing on the beach, where do you start the ocean? Do you start it at the water? But then the water doesn't hold still. It moves back and forth. So it's really hard to define, are we in, the beach? Are we in the ocean? Or here? Are we in the meadow? And then where do we get to the forest? Is it the first tree? What if we cut down that tree? Is that still the forest? So those areas where two ecosystems meet, those are called ecotones. So like the beach meets the ocean. And just the point is, it's really hard to tell if we're trying to like save the beach or save the ocean. Like, where do you start your saving? Do you start it, a mile off stream? Do you start it like 10 feet off the beach? Like, where do we start our conservation? And so defining it is difficult as well. And so that's ecotone. And so why is biodiversity important? Like, why should we care about it? So number one is our soil quality. Inside our soil is everything to humans, because every single food that we eat, for the most part, unless it comes out of the ocean, if it's a land animal, it depends on soil. It depends on healthy plants. It depends on a producer. And soil is what grows those. And so if our soil is declining, which it is, we're doing a really bad job of maintaining our soil, then our ability to feed ourselves is going to decline. So inside of soil, it's not just dirt. There's healthy bacteria, there's algae, there's fungi, there's mites, there's millipede, there's worms, and all of those are eating dead and decaying material and then recycling nutrients back into the soil. And as we plant these farms with these huge monocultures and we just keep planting and planting and planting and planting, we're depleting the resources in the soil and we're having less biodiversity in our soil, which has a negative impact on our survival and the survival of other organisms on Earth.
Our soil is dying. We tend to focus on issues such as fossil fuels or water in our fight for climate action, and often the issue of soil quality gets left in the dust. But it takes an average of 500 years to naturally build an inch of topsoil, and we're losing it at 17 times that rate. Although soil degradation can be caused by a number of natural factors, increasingly soil quality is affected by human actions. Today I'm going to narrow in on one of the bigger human-caused factors, industrial agriculture, in order to answer what soil degradation is, why it's happening, and why we need to strive for better soil health. So first, what is soil degradation? Quite simply, it means a decline in soil health as a result of misuse or poor management. Soil can vary widely in its depth depending on whether it's young or stable and old, but it's generally teeming with life. According to the Earth Institute at Columbia University, it's estimated that an acre of soil may contain 900 pounds of earthworms, 2,400 pounds of fungi, 1,500 pounds of bacteria, 133 pounds of protozoa, 890 pounds of arthropods and algae, and even sometimes small mammals. And when soil health is affected, this biodiverse system wanes. Why then is soil degradation such a big issue now? While the quality of topsoil can definitely be damaged by natural occurrences like floods or wind, the rate of topsoil loss has increased radically over the last 200 years in the United States as a result of modern agricultural practices. In Pimentel et al.'s study on the economics of soil erosion and conservation, they estimate that in the United States, soil has been lost at about 17 times the rate at which it's formed. We can pin some of the soil loss to the intensive cultivation practices and monocropping of industrial agriculture. When we till and turn over a field for the next season's crop using large combines, the topsoil is decimated, much in the same way habitat is lost when clear-cutting a forest. Tillage aerates the soil by breaking up its composition, but in the process compacts the soil underneath and kills the wealth of microorganisms hidden to the naked eye. As a result of many years of industrial cultivation practices, the topsoil lies void of life and then needs to be injected with nutrient-filled fertilizer and chemicals, which in turn alter the chemical makeup of the soil and make it even harder for essential organisms to survive. In short, cultivating the soil always results in the decline of its fertility and health. And the continual use of intensive cultivation over the last century has left the United States with a looming soil crisis. So why does degraded topsoil even matter? And Will it even affect me? Yes, it will, and even more than you think. Healthy soil is the foundation for healthy plants, which are obviously crucial for our survival. This means that when we continually abuse soil structure and quality to pump out massive amounts of corn and soybeans, we are making it harder to grow nutrient-dense food in the future. Right now, almost 33% of the world's soil has been moderately or highly degraded, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And when you consider that soil can store almost 3 times more carbon than forests and other vegetation, killing it could lead to our inability to mitigate climate change. In order to halt this process, we need to reconsider the way we approach agriculture. In Pimentel's study, they argue that the total investment for U.S. erosion control would be about $8.4 billion per year. Considering that erosion causes $44 billion in damages each year, and could very well cause more, this is a no-brainer. But on a more basic level, we should look towards the examples of innovators like Curtis Stone, who is able to create a comfortable lifestyle on a low-till, intensive urban farm. His farm builds soil health by adding compost and natural fertilizer like turkey manure to the soil, as well as keeping the cultivation of the land to a minimum. Yes, industrial agricultural practices have provided a large amount of food to North America, but when we consider the long-term negative effects of those practices and the fact that our food system now relies heavily on just a few crops, the positives of supposed abundance merely seem like a flimsy patch for a leaking ship. Soil is our hidden lifeline, and if we destroy it, we lose our ability to feed ourselves and protect our environment.
All right, so the next thing that soils and biodiversity can do is improve air quality. So plants can remove impurities from the air and filter harmful particles out of the air, so they can make our air cleaner. They can also make our water cleaner because they can kind of suck stuff out of the air and water.
You've probably heard plants can improve your air quality. Just about every paper on the subject, and I mean literally all of them, are based on a 1989 NASA study and a follow-up by the lead scientist. The scientists collected plants and put them in chambers, then pumped in harmful chemicals like these. After 24 hours, they tested the air quality in each chamber. Some plants were able to remove up to 90% of the harmful chemicals. So which plants are the most effective? NASA scientists tested familiar ones.
All the plants they have in their lists are just very common house plants.
This is Dr. Dennis Stevenson, Vice President for Science at the New York Botanical Garden.
I think they picked them because they were looking at things that people would have in their environments, as opposed to some exotic, weird tropical plant that nobody knows anything about.
All of these plants are excellent at getting rid of harmful indoor carcinogens. Here's how it works. Plants take in the harmful gases out of the atmosphere and sequester them in their roots and cells. Some of these chemicals are broken down by fungi in the soil, and others are stored in the plant. So what about things like smoke that might be in your apartment via cigarettes, or other types of smoke?
Well, I would say, like I said, they take up stuff in the atmosphere, so theoretically they should take up any kind of smoke that's in your apartment in a certain sense, right? I don't really know, but I think if one did those tests, that probably one would find some positive correlation with that.
Of all the plants NASA mentioned in its study, these 3 have the best surface area to chemical removal ratio. But keep in mind that a Gerbera daisy will never get as big as a lady palm. And the more plant you have, the more harmful chemicals that you can remove.
So a big leaf plant is probably potentially able to exchange more things with the air than something with little needle leaves.
And for those lacking a green thumb?
I'll tell you, the one in there that's probably the hardest to kill is the Sansevieria, the mother-in-law's tongue.
It scores high on removing chemicals and only needs low light. Hello everyone. If you'd like to learn more about the plants or the experience.
All right, and then maintains water quality. So a variety of vegetation reduces erosion. Reducing erosion will keep a bunch of dirt and chemicals from getting into the water. They also use their roots to absorb pollution from the water. So pest control, most crop pests can be controlled by other organisms. So usually in this area, we spray pesticides on our fields to kill insects, but you could use other insects to remove harmful ones. So an example would be ladybugs. Ladybugs eat these little tiny insects called aphids, and aphids we don't like because they eat our plants. But ladybugs are carnivorous. They don't eat plants, they eat aphids. So you could release ladybugs and that could take care of your aphid problem. And then pollination is probably one of the most important factors here for biodiversity. So one third of the world's crops rely on pollinators, and pollinators are things like bees. And you've probably heard a number of times about how bees are in decline. So saving pollinators saves a huge portion of our food, and we should really be trying to protect and save our pollinators.
Human society is extremely complex and fragile, built upon various pillars. One of them is the honeybee. 1 out of 3 meals eaten by humans is made possible by honeybees. They are so important that if all the honeybees were to die out, thousands of plants would follow, which could lead to millions of people starving in the following years. On top of that, honeybees have a huge economic impact. The dollar value of plants pollinated by them each year is around 265 billion. Food we take for granted would just stop existing without them, or there would be a massive decrease in productivity. Food including apples, onions, pumpkins, and also plants used for feeding livestock, and thus extremely important for our milk and meat. Einstein is often quoted as having said, "If honeybees die out, humans will follow a few years later." Actually, he probably didn't say that, but there might be some truth in the statement. It's unsettling, but honeybees have started to disappear. Millions of hives have died in the last few years. Beekeepers all over the world have seen an annual loss of 30 to 90% of their colonies. In the US alone, bees are steadily declining, from 5 million hives in 1988 to 2.5 million today. Since 2006, a phenomenon called colony collapse disorder has affected honeybees in many countries, and we're not entirely sure what's causing it. All we know is that it's pretty serious.
Alright, so we're not going to watch that whole video. You can if you want. It lists a number of different factors we think that are causing bee decline, and it turns out it's actually all of them. So the pesticides that we use and that we spray on our plants to kill off other bugs make bees sicker and weaker, and then they can't resist a kind of parasite that grows and destroys bees. And so by using pesticides, we are not directly killing the bees, but we're making them weaker, and so they can't fight off infection. But to do that, we'd have to develop better pesticides that don't end up hurting bees. And so I'm sure lots of people are working on that, but our bees are still currently suffering. So potential medicines. One of the things about biodiversity is that that variety of life may hold the key to drugs that could save people's lives. So lots of our new antibiotics are coming from soils. We're able to find them in the fungi that grow in soils. But if we kill off the soils and then we kill off those fungi, we lose access to those potential medicines. So what are 5 threats to biodiversity? So first, habitat destruction and fragmentation, and then invasive species, and then population growth of humans, and pollution, again from humans, and overconsumption, again from humans. So of these 5, all of them are our fault, okay? And so we'll talk about that. So the 5 threats to biodiversity are pretty much just people and the way that we live our lives and our decisions about what we do with Earth and its resources. So habitat destruction is when we change a habitat to suit our needs. So before we were here, this was wild land, and coming in and building houses and building farms, that's going to affect the organisms that live in that area negatively, usually. This will displace them. They'll have to go somewhere else or they'll die. And as the human population grows, which it has, it's grown significantly and it continues to grow, so will our habitat destruction, because we want more land, to build more houses, to build more fields, to feed more people. And so we cut down rainforests now to grow coffee, so that way people can have more coffee because there's more people who like to drink coffee. So lots of that leads to habitat destruction. Fragmentation is where we take a large habitat and we just kind of chop it into smaller pieces. And this creates what's called edge habitat, where inner habitat used to be. And so those animals that were once inside and protected are now on the edge where they're vulnerable. And some plants and animals can't adapt to that. So here's an example. You have this habitat. Now these guys in the light area, these are edge animals, and they have adapted to the edge and they can interact with humans here at the edge and they're fine. But these animals in the middle, these are inner animals. They're used to being protected inside here, so not really interacting with humans. And then we come through and we build a road right through their habitat. Now these edge animals, now you have more edge animals because now this species over here has to interact with the road and it might get hit and killed, or there might be a town here and now these animals have to interact with humans in the town, where once they used to be protected inside here, inside this inner habitat, now they're exposed to people. And anytime an animal is exposed to people, it usually doesn't work out well for the animal. One of the cool ways that we can protect animals from roads is by building these animal bridges. Here's what it looks like in the spring, and then here's it in the winter. And so animals can cross over these bridges and be protected and not be hit by cars. And I think there's only like 2 of these in the United States. And I want to say one of them just got built recently, and it was built, both of them are on through Native American reservations. So that tells you something about Americans' priority. So Native Americans are prioritizing the protection of animals to, stop them from getting hit by cars, whereas normal, everyday, average Americans, you've probably never seen this one because there's very few of these. But even they're a good idea to protect animals from getting hit by cars. I love the lynx or the bobcat in that video that was just like acting like a cat, like stretching and then clawing the log. It looks exactly like a house cat. So now on to invasive species. So any organism that has been relocated somewhere rather than its original habitat. This is due to humans. Humans are doing the relocating. So they're also called introduced species, non-native species, exotic species, and alien species. And oftentimes the invasive species outcompetes native species and results in a disruption of the ecosystem and the food chain. And many native organisms are becoming endangered by this. This is a huge problem. Huge, 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 huge. And it causes so much destruction to ecosystems. Because if you have this ecosystem and everything is all good and the food web is all balanced and everyone is keeping each other in check, and then you introduce a prey or a predator, it comes in and it takes resources, and then it doesn't have any natural predators because you're like, I don't know what this thing is, so no one usually eats it. They don't remove it, and so it takes over ecosystems and kind of destroys them.
Massive vines that blanket the southern United States, climbing as high as 100 feet as they uproot trees and swallow buildings. A ravenous snake that is capable of devouring an alligator. Rabbit populations that eat themselves into starvation. These aren't horror movie concepts, they're real stories. But how could such situations exist in nature? All three are examples of invasive species, organisms harmful not because of what they are, but where they happen to be. The kudzu vine, for example, had grown quietly in its native East Asia, eaten by various insects and dying off during the cold winters. But its fortunes changed when it was imported into the southeastern United States for porch decoration and cattle feed. Its planting was even subsidized by the government to fight soil erosion. With sunny fields, a mild climate, and no natural predators in its new home, the vine grew uncontrollably until it became known as the plant that ate the South. Meanwhile, in Florida's Everglades, Burmese pythons, thought to have been released by pet owners, are the cause of decreasing populations of organisms. They're successfully outcompeting top predators, such as the alligator and panther, causing a significant reduction in their food sources. They're not a problem in their native Asia because diseases, parasites, and predators help to control their population size. And in Australia, European rabbits eat so many plants that they wipe out the food supply for themselves and other herbivores. They're a pretty recent addition, intentionally introduced to the continent because one man enjoyed hunting them. Like the Burmese pythons, various factors in their native habitat keep their numbers in control. But in Australia, the lack of predators and a climate perfect for year-long reproduction allows their populations to skyrocket. So why does this keep happening? Most of the world's ecosystems are the result of millennia of co-evolution by organisms, adapting to their environment and each other until a stable balance is reached. Healthy ecosystems maintain this balance via limiting factors, environmental conditions that restrict the size or range of a species. These include things like natural geography and climate, food availability, and the presence or absence of predators. For example, plant growth depends on levels of sunlight and soil nutrients. The amount of edible plants affects the population of herbivores, which in turn impacts the carnivores that feed on them. And a healthy predator population keeps the herbivores from becoming too numerous and devouring all the plants. But even minor changes in one factor can upset this balance, and the sudden introduction of non-native organisms can be a pretty major change. A species that has evolved in a separate habitat will be susceptible to different limiting factors, different predators, different energy sources, and different climates. If the new habitat's limiting factors fail to restrict the species' growth, it will continue to multiply, outcompeting native organisms for resources and disrupting the entire ecosystem. Species are sometimes introduced into new habitats through natural factors like storms, ocean currents, or climate shifts. The majority of invasive species, though, are introduced by humans. Often this happens unintentionally, as when the zebra mussel was accidentally brought to Lake Erie by cargo ships. But as people migrate around the world, we have also deliberately brought our plants and animals along, rarely considering the consequences. But now that we're learning more about the effects of invasive species on ecosystems, many governments closely monitor the transport of plants and animals and ban the imports of certain organisms. But could the species with the most drastic environmental impact be a group of primates who emerged from Africa to cover most of the world? Are we an invasive species?
An example of an invasive species is the zebra mussels. They were brought over in like the ballast of ships when you like suck up water and to make your ship kind of float. And then they were introduced to America, and they've pretty much just taken over all of our waterways. They have no natural predators. A lot of times, if you have a pipe that goes into like the Great Lakes, it can get completely full of zebra mussels, or here they are taking over a propeller of a ship. So if you travel on the United States waterways, you may have noticed that, like when you come from Yuma to California, you pass through an agricultural checkpoint, and they are looking for invasive species. They're looking for bugs some time of the year. They're looking for, if you're bringing back a boat, they'll check it for mussels. And so we do try and restrict these. We haven't always done such a great job in the past, but we're trying to be better about stopping these invasive species, because once they're there, it's very, very hard to remove them. So, population growth of humans. I don't think anything else has probably like changed the ecosystem and biodiversity on Earth as much as us and how much we've grown. So, increasing population means we need more food, we need more shelter, we need more fuel, we need more water. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, we should, kill off all the humans because we're doing a horrible job on the planet, but we can make better decisions. So this often leads to habitat loss, pollution, resource scarcity, overconsumption. If you've got enough money, lots of Americans throw, food away. And humans are coming into greater and more frequent contact with previously wild areas that had high biodiversity. We go in and we take over, the land, and we change it. We chop down the trees, we plant what we want, and that changes the biodiversity of the landscape. And we are continuing to grow. So by 2023, that's pretty soon here, we're supposed to get to 8 billion people on Earth, and it's just going to keep going up from there. So one of the things that's kind of cool about this graph, if you look, this is the year 300, 400, 500, 600. It's pretty flat, 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 flat. And then here in the mid 1700s, what do you think happened to cause this growth? And the answer is the Industrial Revolution. The inventions of machines and the invention of farming and monocultures and those sort of things and pesticides, that really allowed our population to grow. Before that, we didn't have the ability to have a tractor. You had to, plow by hand, and that's going to limit your ability to feed yourself. But now we have huge factory farms, we have huge factories, we can build and produce. And so that really did allow the human population to kind of take off there. Pollution. So pollution alters a habitat to the point where some plants and animals can't survive anymore. And global climate change, that's a kind of pollution. So we'll talk about this one more next week. So many species are intolerant to changes in temperature. Polar bears, you may have heard of polar bears. They float on ice floats. And so they get on the ice float, and then they kind of wait for a seal to stick its head up, and they smack the seal and pull it onto the ice and kill it. But if the ice melts, then the polar bears don't have ice floats. And so they're intolerant to those changes in temperature because they rely on the cold water. And this is going to affect feeding relationships and breeding patterns. And it has killed lots of organisms are going extinct because of this. And then acid rain and air pollution, these are still problems. And also they don't respect borders. So the United States is the #1 producer of carbon. When you look at who is causing climate change, it is us. We are the #1 producer, and we really aren't doing enough to stop that. And the air that we create, the carbon dioxide that we create through our factories and through oil refineries and through everything, through our cars, that goes into the air, and the air doesn't stop at the United States border. It's not like we are the only ones affected by our choice to use fossil fuels and our choice to pollute. The air goes to everywhere. And our acid rain, which comes from the production of fossil fuels, because they make sulfur, and then the sulfur goes into the air and it comes down back down as sulfuric acid. Our acid rain went over to Canada and it destroyed huge portions of their sugar maple forest, which is huge to Canada. And Canada loves their maple trees. And so it was not Canada's choices that were affecting Canada, it was the United States choices. So other countries affect everyone. And so our choices and what we do with our carbon pollution affects everyone on the planet. And to some extent, that's not fair. If you're a small, non industrialized country, you're going to suffer the effects of climate change, even though your country didn't contribute to that climate change. And so the only way for that to kind of go away or be mitigated is if the United States addresses our carbon pollution. And then overconsumption. So individuals, particularly in America and other industrialized countries, we consume way more than we need to survive. We buy lots and lots and lots of stuff, even though it's stuff that we don't really need, and that maintains our high standard of life. And in America, most of us have a fairly high standard of life compared to other people in the world. And so industrialized nations are only 25% of the population, but we take 75% of the Earth's resources because we just buy too much stuff. And in the United States, we're only 5% of the world's population, but we make 33% of the world's pollution. So it's definitely an inequality issue here with how much the Earth is being destroyed by humans. And it's not all of the humans, it's a smaller portion of the humans are causing those problems.